The first thing I ever noticed about Luke was his eyes. Those deep brown eyes that made me feel like he could see right into my soul. I never imagined that one day, those eyes would turn into something I feared the most: darkness. It wasn't just the loss of vision that struck us, it was everything that came with it. The sudden change in our world, the sharp edge of uncertainty, and the feeling of helplessness that I couldn't escape. When the accident happened, everything shifted in an instant. One moment we were laughing over breakfast like we always did, the next I was sitting by his hospital bed, holding his hand, praying that he would wake up. But when he did wake up, his world was forever changed. His vision was gone, no warning, no time to prepare. In the beginning, I didn't know what to do. I wasn't prepared for this. I knew how to love him, how to care for him, but I didn't know how to navigate this new world where he couldn't see. And yet, despite it all, we found a way to make it work. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I took on the role of his caretaker, his guide, and at times even his voice. My days revolved around him, around making sure he could navigate the world he used to see. From the moment he woke up until the moment he fell asleep, I was there. I was the one who helped him pick out his clothes, the one who told him what was on the TV, the one who explained the world outside the window. But behind my smiles, behind my quiet strength, there was a sadness that no one ever saw. I never talked about it. How could I? How could I complain when he was the one who had lost so much? But in those quiet moments when he was asleep or when he was in the other room, I would feel the weight of the life I had put aside. My dreams, my aspirations, they were all on hold. And I didn't know how long I could keep pretending that I was okay. Lucas never asked for any of this. He never asked for me to be his eyes. But that's what I became: his eyes, his legs, his entire world. Over time, I stopped living for myself. Every moment was focused on him. If he was happy, then I was happy. If he was frustrated, I was frustrated. If he felt hopeless, I felt hopeless. But I never showed him that. Because he needed me to be strong. I needed to be the rock he could lean on. I couldn't show him the cracks in my own foundation, because I knew it would only add to the guilt he already carried. He didn't want to be a burden to me. I could see it in his eyes, the way he avoided asking for help, the way he hesitated when he needed me to guide him. His acceptance of his blindness came slowly. At first he fought it, angry and bitter at the world for taking so much away from him. And who could blame him? I watched him struggle, not just with the physical limitations, but with the emotional toll it took on him. It was as if the world had closed its doors on him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a way back in. And then came the silence. Over time, the laughter we once shared became fewer and farther between. He didn't laugh like he used to. His eyes, the ones that used to shine with excitement, were now dull, distant. He would sit in silence, staring at the nothingness in front of him. I tried to keep talking, to fill the silence with my voice, but sometimes it felt like I was talking to a wall. I was starting to lose him. But the worst part was the guilt I felt. I could see it in him, how much he hated depending on me, how much it tore him apart every time he had to ask me to do something. I could feel the walls he was building between us. And as much as I tried to reassure him that it was okay, that I was happy to help, part of me resented it. It wasn't that I resented him. It was that I resented the life we had been given, the life I had put on hold. I resented that I couldn't be the person I used to be. That I couldn't chase my own dreams while being his caretaker. But I couldn't say that to him. I couldn't burden him with my feelings. So I kept them hidden. And slowly I began to drown in silence. Every day was the same. I would help him through his routine, prepare his meals, guide him around the house. I did everything I could to keep his world as close to normal as possible. But I couldn't help feeling like I was losing myself in the process. And then one day it happened. Lucas sat beside me, his face unreadable. His fingers traced the rim of his cup, as if he were searching for something he couldn't find. Finally, he looked at me, his expression vulnerable for the first time in years. "I don't want to be a burden to you," he said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent so much time hiding my own pain, my own struggles, that I never stopped to think about his. He thought he was the burden. He didn't realize that the weight I carried wasn't just because of what he needed. It was because I had stopped living for myself. "I love you, Lucas," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't want to live without you. But I feel like I've forgotten who I am." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just held me, his arms wrapping around me tightly, as if he could somehow make up for everything that had been left unsaid. And in that moment I realized that we were both blind. Not in the literal sense, but in the way we had been living, so caught up in our own pain and struggles that we had forgotten to see each other for who we truly were. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to be both his caretaker and the person I had once been. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. We needed to face the truth together. The truth was that we couldn't keep living like this, with me constantly sacrificing myself, with Lucas feeling like he was nothing more than a burden. It was time to find a new way forward, a new way to love each other, a way that didn't involve me losing myself in the process. The phone call came on a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where everything felt still, like the world outside had forgotten to keep moving. I had just finished making lunch for Lucas, setting the plate in front of him on the table, when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something about it tugged at me. Something in my gut told me this was important. I hesitated for a moment, taking in a deep breath before answering, trying to calm the sudden racing of my heart. "Hello," I said, my voice betraying the tension I couldn't hide. "Hello. This is Dr. Harris from the neurology department. I'm calling about Lucas's recent test results." My pulse quickened. The last time I'd heard from Dr. Harris was months ago, when they had conducted the latest round of tests on Lucas's condition, tests that had yielded nothing promising. I had been prepared for more bad news, more of the same. But Dr. Harris's voice carried something different today. An unmistakable optimism. "I'm happy to report that the experimental treatment we've been testing on Lucas is showing some very promising results," Dr. Harris continued. "There's a chance, a very good chance, that his sight could be partially restored. His vision, though still limited, is beginning to show signs of improvement." I froze, the phone feeling like it was miles away from my ear. For a few seconds I couldn't comprehend what I had just heard. My mind raced, my thoughts tangled and collided with each other. Could it really be true? Could Lucas, my Lucas, be able to see again? "Wait, you mean he might actually be able to see?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Yes," Dr. Harris confirmed, sounding almost as amazed as I was. "It's early, but the treatment has had a positive effect on his visual cortex. We're cautiously optimistic. It could take a few more weeks to confirm, but the signs are there." The words hung in the air like a heavy breath that had been held too long. I didn't know what to feel. Should I be overjoyed? Should I start planning for a future where Lucas could see again? Or should I guard my heart against the disappointment of it all being a false hope? "Thank you, Dr. Harris," I said softly, still unsure of how to process the information. I need to think about this." "I understand," Dr. Harris replied. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in touch again soon with more updates. We'll monitor his progress closely." I hung up, my hand shaking slightly as I placed the receiver back into its cradle. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone, wondering if this was real. Was this really happening? Or was I just grasping at straws, trying to hold on to a flicker of hope that had been denied to us for so long? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me, not yet. I had to be cautious. After all, we had been down this road before. So many times before. The doctors had given us hope, only for it to be crushed when the treatments didn't work, when the promises faded away. I had to prepare myself for that possibility. I couldn't let myself fall apart if it didn't work. But what if this time was different? What if, against all odds, this was the moment that changed everything for Lucas and me? I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. How could I tell Lucas? How could I share this news without getting his hopes up? Without making him believe that everything would suddenly be different? What if the treatment didn't work? What if he was left disappointed once again, and I was the one who had to bear the burden of his shattered dreams? At the same time, I felt an aching sense of excitement deep within me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long. The possibility of Lucas being able to see again, a possibility I never thought I'd entertain, was like a door opening to a new future. A future where we could experience life together in a way we hadn't in years. But how could I tell him? How could I bring this up when we had spent so much time in the dark, both literally and figuratively? The idea of Lucas being able to see me, to see the world again, terrified me. It was a dream I had long buried, a dream that, even if it came true, might bring changes that neither of us was ready for. I couldn't deny the fear that clenched my stomach. If I told Lucas, would it change things between us? Would he begin to feel like he didn't need me as much anymore? Would he be able to see me in a new light, one where I wasn't his caretaker, his guide? And if that happened, what would that mean for us? The thought of losing the bond we had, the connection that had grown so strong over the years, made my heart ache. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I wasn't sure I could let go of the role I had spent so long playing. I knew Lucas would never want me to feel this way. He would never want me to feel like I was losing my place in his life. But the truth was, I had built my entire existence around taking care of him, around helping him navigate a world he could no longer see. If he regained his sight, would that mean I would lose the only purpose I had left? Would I lose the part of me that had been shaped by the sacrifice, the caregiving, the quiet love I had given him? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, lost in my thoughts, before I made a decision. I couldn't keep this from him. He deserved to know. After all, this wasn't just about me, it was about us, about our future. Whatever that future looked like, it was going to be something we faced together. But I didn't know how to begin. As I prepared dinner that evening, I found myself distracted, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of the news sat heavily on my chest, and I wondered if Lucas could sense that something was different, that something was about to change. He entered the kitchen as I was stirring the pot on the stove. I looked up and saw the familiar warmth in his eyes, the quiet understanding that always existed between us. But tonight there was something else there. A flicker of uncertainty, as if he could feel the shift in the air, even though I hadn't said a word. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas stopped in his tracks, sensing the seriousness in my tone. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. We had learned long ago to read each other's unspoken words. He simply nodded and sat down at the table, waiting. I took a deep breath and slowly began to speak. "The doctors called today. They have news about your treatment." Lucas's expression softened, the slightest flicker of hope lighting up his face. I could see it in his eyes. He was already prepared for bad news, as we both had been for so long. But the optimism I had been trying to suppress bubbled to the surface. "They think there's a chance. A real chance that you could see again." The words hung between us, full of possibility and fear, and for the first time in months, I saw Lucas's face light up, not with disbelief but with something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time, hope. As the days turned into weeks, small changes began to surface, subtle yet undeniable. At first, they were things that Lucas himself didn't even recognize. There was no grand moment, no dramatic transformation, just these quiet shifts in his behavior. He would pause mid-step, his brow furrowing as though he had just seen something he wasn't sure he was supposed to. Started with his movements. He was walking with more confidence, no longer relying on me as much to guide him. One evening, while we were sitting in the living room, he stood up to stretch. His hand brushed against the edge of the coffee table, something he had never been able to do with any certainty before. He turned to me, a puzzled look on his face. "Did I just?" He trailed off, looking at the table with confusion in his eyes. "I think I just saw the edge of the table." It was a simple thing, something most people wouldn't even notice. But for Lucas, it was a milestone. His hand had reached out with the confidence of someone who could see, not just feel. My heart skipped a beat, and I struggled to hide my smile. But I couldn't fully embrace the moment. Not yet. Not until I was sure. I didn't want to raise his hopes too quickly, only to watch them fall. After all, we had been down this road before, where hope was nothing more than a cruel joke. Over the next few days, I began to notice more of these small, almost imperceptible signs. Lucas was noticing details in the house that he hadn't been able to see before. How the sunlight filtered through the curtains in the morning, casting a golden hue on the walls. He would comment on the flowers outside, the vibrant colors that were suddenly so vivid to him. One morning I watched him as he sat at the breakfast table, a spoon hovering over his bowl of cereal. His gaze was fixed on the spoon as if he were studying it intently. He picked it up, then set it back down, his brow furrowed. He looked up at me. Is this the right spoon?" he asked, as though doubting whether he could trust his own eyes. I saw it then. The confusion. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It wasn't a moment where he threw his arms around me in joy. Instead, it was a quiet, tentative realization that something had changed. The way he wasn't sure if he could trust what he was seeing made my heart ache. He wasn't convinced yet. He didn't know if the world he was seeing was real, or just a trick his mind was playing on him. I knew what that felt like, doubting everything, wondering if this was just another cruel illusion. So I didn't say anything. I just smiled and nodded. "It's the right spoon," I said softly, trying to ease his uncertainty. And as much as I wanted to be excited, to leap with joy at the thought of him regaining his sight, I couldn't. I couldn't allow myself to feel the full weight of hope until I was sure. This wasn't just about Lucas. It was about us, about how our world was about to change and how I wasn't sure I was ready for that change. The days continued to pass, each one bringing a new small sign, a new glimpse of the person Lucas used to be. His confidence grew. He started walking around the house without my guidance, though he would still occasionally reach for my hand for reassurance. But each time, I could feel him testing the boundaries of his newfound vision. He'd pause, squint at something in the distance, and then smile as if he were confirming the reality of it. I found myself watching him more closely than I ever had before. I would sit across the room pretending to read or do something else, but all the while I was watching him. I wanted to see if he was noticing the things I'd been afraid to mention, to see if he was truly seeing. The way he reacted when he reached the top of the stairs, his careful steps now more assured, told me everything I needed to know. But still I held back. I didn't want to rush him. I didn't want to rush myself. I wanted to give him space to process this change in his own time, in his own way. After all, this wasn't just about his sight returning. It was about everything that would follow. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the aftermath. There were moments, quiet ones, when I found myself questioning everything. My role, my purpose, our future. As Lucas began to reclaim pieces of his old life, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something too. The thought terrified me. What if he no longer needed me? What if this newfound independence he was gaining meant he would no longer need me to take care of him, to guide him through the world? It wasn't just about his sight. It was about the way his regaining it would shift our dynamic. I had been his caretaker, his rock for so long. But what would happen when he could see again? Would I still have a place in his life? Would I still be the one to help him navigate the world? Or would he begin to drift away from me, needing less of me with every passing day? The fear was overwhelming. And yet I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud. I couldn't bring myself to tell him how I was feeling. How terrified I was of losing the part of myself that had been defined by taking care of him. I had become so intertwined with his blindness, with the life we had built around it, that the thought of it all changing felt like a loss I wasn't sure I could bear. What if I had lost myself in the process of being his eyes? What if, in helping him reclaim his vision, I lost my sense of purpose? The thought kept me awake at night. I would lie there in the dark, listening to the soft sound of his breathing, wondering what our future would look like now that things were starting to change. I didn't know what it would mean for us, for our relationship, for the love we had built. But one thing was clear. Everything was changing, and I didn't know how to keep up. In those moments when the doubt and fear crept in, I tried to push them aside. I told myself that the change was good, that Lucas had the right to regain his independence, to see the world again. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself. I wasn't sure how to exist in a world where I wasn't needed in the same way. As Lucas continued to discover his new reality, I found myself wondering just how much this would alter our relationship. Would he still look at me the same way? Would he still need me? Or would he look at me and see someone who wasn't as essential to his life anymore? The fear of the unknown, of the change we were both going through, gripped me tighter with each passing day. And yet I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop the change. It was happening whether I was ready for it or not. The sound of footsteps behind me was so familiar that I didn't even have to turn around to know it was Lucas. I could tell by the subtle shift in the air, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, the slight hesitation before he spoke. I was in the kitchen making coffee, the scent of it filling the room as I moved around the counter. I'd been lost in my thoughts, the quiet moments of the morning always giving me the space to reflect, to think about everything we'd been through. Then I heard it. "I can see you." The word struck me like a bolt of lightning. I froze, my hand gripping the coffee pot tightly as I turned around slowly, unsure if I had heard him right. Lucas was standing in the doorway, his expression one I had never seen before. Confusion, awe, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. First, I didn't believe it. I couldn't. It was too soon, too unbelievable. The doctors had said that there was a possibility, but I had tried not to get my hopes up. I had convinced myself that the changes, the small signs of improvement, were just that, small, insignificant changes. Nothing to hold on to, not yet. But now as I looked at him, I saw it. His eyes were fixed on me, and they were different. There was a clarity there. A sharpness that hadn't been there before. His gaze was focused, intense, like he could see every detail of me, every little thing that had once been just a blur to him. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world around us seemed to disappear as time slowed down. The noise of the kitchen, the ticking of the clock, all faded away until it was just the two of us, Lucas standing in front of me and me staring at him in disbelief. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart started to race, a mixture of excitement and fear swirling inside me. What did this mean? What did this moment mean for us? For our relationship? He took another step closer, his expression softening. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Can you see me?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Could I see him? Of course I could see him, but I hadn't seen him like this before, really seen him. In all the years we had spent together, in all the moments I had helped him navigate his world, I had never truly looked at him the way I was looking at him now. He was right in front of me, his eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I could see the man I had been so afraid to lose. "I can see you," I whispered, my voice barely audible, as if saying it out loud would make it disappear. The room felt smaller, the space between us growing tighter with every breath. The reality of it all started to settle in. Lucas could see again. He could see me, truly see me after all this time. I felt a rush of emotions flood over me, joy, relief, love, and yes, fear. Fear that I hadn't expected. Fear that I couldn't explain. I had spent so long taking care of him, being his eyes in a world of darkness. And now what was I supposed to do? What did this mean for us? Lucas smiled, his eyes sparkling with something I hadn't seen in so long. The joy was overwhelming. "I can't believe it," he murmured, almost to himself, as if he couldn't quite grasp the reality of what was happening. His hand reached up to touch his face, his fingers brushing over the features that he had only known through touch and memory. "This is real, right? I'm not imagining this." I nodded, still struggling to process everything. "It's real," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You can see." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out toward me. I didn't move, didn't know what to do, but instinctively my hand reached for his. The moment our hands met, the world seemed to come back into focus. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. "I can see you," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I can see everything." I didn't know what to say. The tears that I had been holding back finally escaped, falling down my cheeks as I looked at him. All this time, all the sacrifices, the pain, the frustration, it felt like it had all led to this moment. And yet I couldn't shake the unease that crept up on me. This was supposed to be the moment of joy, right? This was the moment we had waited for, the moment I had prayed for. But why did I feel so lost? As the days passed, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. Lucas was adjusting to his sight, and I could see the excitement and wonder in his eyes as he took in the world. Again, every detail, every color, every little thing he had missed for so long was now open to him. It was beautiful to watch him rediscover the world, but it was also terrifying. We had spent years in a delicate balance, our relationship defined by the way I had cared for him, the way I had been his constant companion in the darkness. But now things were different. He no longer needed me in the same way. He was walking on his own, moving through the house with more confidence than I had ever seen. It was like he was finally free, and while that should have filled me with happiness, it also filled me with fear. The dynamic between us was shifting, and I didn't know how to keep up. For so long I had been everything to him. I had been the one to guide him, to help him navigate his world. But now he was seeing the world without me by his side, and it felt like I was slowly losing him. He no longer needed me to help him with the simple things like getting around the house or reading. He could do those things on his own now, and that hurt in a way I didn't expect. There were moments when he would look at me, his eyes filled with awe, and I would smile, but the smile felt hollow. I loved him and I was so happy for him, but there was a part of me that felt like I was being left behind. The love we shared, our bond, had always been centered around his blindness. It had defined our relationship, and now that it was gone, I wasn't sure who we were anymore. Lucas could see, but I was still struggling to see who I was in this new world. He noticed the change in me, of course. I could see it in his eyes, how he was trying to reach out, trying to connect with me in the way he always had. But I was pulling away, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to adjust to this new reality. "I'm still here," he said one night, his voice soft as he sat beside me on the couch. "I know it's different, but I'm still the same person." But I wasn't sure I was still the same person. I wasn't sure where I fit into his world now that he could see. As I watched Lucas rediscover life, my heart swelled with pride and love for him. But underneath it all was a quiet fear that I couldn't shake. I didn't know how to balance my love for him with the fear of losing myself in the process. Lucas was adjusting to the world again, and I knew that meant I would have to adjust too. But the thought of losing what we had, the simple, unspoken connection that had been born out of our shared struggle, was terrifying. I didn't know who I was without it. This was supposed to be a moment of celebration, but all I could feel was the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I had to step back, let him experience this transformation on his own, even if it meant feeling like I was losing a part of myself in the process. As the weeks passed, I watched Lucas change in ways I hadn't anticipated. The man who had once needed my guidance every step of the way was now navigating the world on his own, with more confidence and independence than I had ever seen in him. At first, it was small things, moving around the house with less hesitation, picking up items he hadn't been able to identify before. But soon those small changes turned into bigger ones. He started going outside more, taking walks alone, relishing in the world he hadn't fully seen in years. He looked at the trees, the flowers, the sky, and for the first time in so long, I saw a light in his eyes, a spark of wonder that hadn't been there before. His independence grew with each passing day, and at first I was happy for him. Of course I was. He deserved this. But the more he grew into himself, the more I felt like I was slipping away. I used to be everything to him. I was his eyes, his guide, his constant companion. But now I felt like I was standing on the sidelines, watching him live a life I wasn't a part of anymore. He didn't need me to tell him what the world looked like. He didn't need me to guide him through the simplest tasks. He was out there, seeing the world on his own, making decisions without me, talking to people I didn't even know. I started to notice the small things, how our conversations grew shorter, how the silence between us became heavier. We didn't share the same moments anymore. When he came home from a walk or from a meeting, he didn't need me to fill in the blanks about what he had seen or done. He could do it himself. He could tell me about the things he had noticed, the colors, the faces, the details that once had only existed in my descriptions. And as he shared his discoveries, I felt myself pulling away, feeling more like a stranger than a partner. It wasn't that he was pulling away from me. It wasn't that he had stopped loving me. It was the simple fact that his world had changed, and I wasn't sure where I fit into it anymore. I wasn't the one helping him navigate anymore. I wasn't the one he turned to when things seemed confusing. I had become a background character in a life I had once shared the lead role in. And the more he blossomed into this new version of himself, the more I shrank into the shadows of his past. There were days when I sat in the same room as him, but it felt like we were miles apart. He would tell me about his day, and I would listen, nodding and offering the occasional comment, but something in me was shutting down. The gap between us, the emotional distance, was growing, and I didn't know how to bridge it. I didn't know how to tell him what I was feeling without sounding like I was jealous or selfish. But that's how it felt, like I was losing my place in his life. I had spent so much time caring for him, guiding him, being his eyes, and now that he didn't need me in the same way, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what role I had left to play in his world. Was I just his partner now? Was that enough? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was disappearing. It wasn't long before Lucas noticed. I didn't want him to, but he did. The silence between us, the way I became withdrawn, the way I stopped offering to help him, all of it added up to something he couldn't ignore. One night, after dinner, he sat down beside me on the couch, his brow furrowed. "Something's wrong, Sophia," he said quietly. His voice, usually so full of warmth, now carried a note of uncertainty. "You've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" I didn't know what to say. I had kept everything bottled up, afraid that if I spoke my mind it would sound like I was resentful or worse, that I was being selfish. But the truth was I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started, my voice shaking. I didn't know how to say it without sounding petty. "I'm afraid, Lucas." He looked at me, his expression softening. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of losing you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I loved being the one who helped you, the one who guided you. I loved feeling like I was needed. But now that you can see again, I feel like I don't have a place in your life anymore. I feel like I'm fading into the background." Lucas was silent for a moment, his face unreadable. But then he reached for my hand, his fingers warm against my cold skin. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can see now, yes. But that doesn't change anything. You're still the most important person in my life. I've always needed you, even when I didn't know it." His words hit me like a wave, crashing over the walls I had built around myself. "But you don't need me in the same way anymore," I whispered. "You can see. You don't need me to guide you, to tell you what the world looks like. You're free now, Lucas. And I don't know where I fit into that anymore." Lucas squeezed my hand, his eyes full of sincerity. "I may not need you to guide me physically anymore, but I still need you. I need you in ways I never expected. You've been my strength, my rock, and nothing about that changes because I can see." I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. But what if it does? What if we don't need each other the way we used to? Lucas shook his head, his expression firm. "We'll need each other in different ways, but we still need each other, Sophia. I've seen the world again, yes, but what I've realized is that seeing doesn't make everything perfect. It's what we've been through together, what we've built, that makes us strong. And I don't want to lose that." The tears that had been building in my chest finally spilled over, and I let them fall, not caring anymore. "I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared of what happens next, scared of losing the connection we had. I don't know how to move forward when everything has changed." Lucas pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me. "We'll figure it out together. I need you, Sophia. Not just for what you've done for me, but for who you are. You're my partner, and nothing will change that." In that moment, I realized that my fears weren't about losing him. They were about losing myself in the process of trying to be everything he needed. But Lucas was right. We could move forward, and we would. The world had changed, but we didn't have to change with it. We could find a new way to love each other, a new way to support each other, one that didn't rely on his blindness or my caretaking. And as Lucas held me in his arms, I felt the distance between us start to fade, the connection we had always shared beginning to heal in a new, stronger way. Together, we would face whatever came next. As the days passed, the quiet tension that had settled between us began to ease. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible shifts. A lingering glance, a soft touch, an unexpected smile exchanged over breakfast. But those little moments, those tiny gestures, were the foundation of something deeper. A connection that had always existed beneath the surface, but had been hidden by the layers of struggle and uncertainty. Lucas and I had always communicated through the unsaid, through the spaces between words. The years of blindness had created a language of its own, an understanding that went beyond sight. But now, as his sight returned, I realized that communication had to evolve. We had to learn how to be together in this new reality, one where he could see the world with his own eyes. The absence of my role as his constant guide was unsettling, yet it also forced us to rediscover each other in a way we hadn't in years. We started to talk more, really talk about our fears, our hopes, and our dreams. The silence that had once been filled with the weight of his blindness was now filled with new possibilities. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but little by little, the emotional distance between us began to close. We had both been so focused on what we couldn't do that we had forgotten what we could do together. The small things that had once felt impossible were now our moments of joy. We laughed again. We laughed over dinner, at jokes that had once fallen flat when we were weighed down by the emotional burden of his condition. We watched movies without me having to describe every detail, And though it felt strange at first, it was also freeing. It felt like we were getting back to the basics, rediscovering who we were as individuals, but more importantly, rediscovering who we were as a team. The blindness that had once defined our relationship, that had forced us into roles we didn't choose, no longer held the same power over us. Instead, we began to embrace a new normal, one where our love was built not on dependency, but on the strength of our bond. I realized, as we spent more time together, that I had been so focused on his blindness that I had neglected parts of myself. For so long, my identity had been tied to being Lucas's caretaker, to being the one who guided him through life. But now that he could see, I was forced to confront a new truth. I had forgotten who I was when I wasn't taking care of someone else. I had lost sight of my own dreams, my own desires, my own sense of self. And so, I began to take steps to find myself again. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt crept in, when I felt like I was being selfish for wanting more than just to be a caretaker. But slowly I started doing things that made me happy. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and hiking. I spent time with friends, and I even started to pursue new professional goals that had been on the back burner for so long. It felt strange at first, like I was stepping into a new life that was unfamiliar and uncertain. But in the end, it was liberating. I was reminded of who I was before all the hardships, before the weight of Lucas's blindness had consumed my every moment. For Lucas, the transition wasn't easy either. Regaining his sight didn't just mean seeing the world again. It meant confronting the life he had lived in the darkness. It meant adjusting to a world he had once known only through memory and description. And that was a process filled with confusion, amazement, and frustration. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, unsure of how to navigate his new reality. The world was brighter, sharper, but it was also strange. He had to relearn things he had taken for granted. The way faces looked, the colors of things, the small details he had missed for so long. But unlike me, he was doing it on his own terms. He was forging his path, rediscovering his independence, and that was something I could never take away from him. We both realized that this new chapter wasn't about returning to what we once had, but about creating something new. Something that was even better than before. We had both changed, yes, but we had changed together. There were no more roles to play, no more expectations to live up to. We were simply two people, each finding their place in the world again. I think that's what made this new life so beautiful. It wasn't just that we had learned to live with the change, it was that we had learned to live together in a new way. I wasn't just his caretaker anymore. I was his partner, his equal. And he wasn't just the man I had to guide through life. He was the man I could now share the world with side by side. The dynamic had shifted, and though there were moments of uncertainty, those moments were filled with the promise of something deeper, something more real. I began to see him in a new light, not just as the man who had once been blind, but as the man who had come back from that darkness, who had found his way back to me, and who was now walking beside me, no longer in need of a guide, but rather as a partner in this journey. The fact that he could see again was beautiful, yes, but what was even more beautiful was how he was rediscovering himself, how he was finding his way back to a life that was entirely his own. And in that process I found myself too. I began to embrace the fact that I wasn't just someone who took care of him. I was someone with my own dreams, my own purpose, and my own life to live. We were both starting anew, and that was something I had never expected to feel again. But in the midst of everything that had happened, we had found a way to not only love each other, but to love ourselves again, as individuals and as partners. And as we sat together one evening, watching the sun set through the window, Lucas squeezed my hand. I could see him, really see him, and I could feel the warmth of his hand in mine. This was our new beginning, our new normal, and I had never felt more alive. As I sat in the quiet of our home, the soft glow of the evening light streaming through the windows, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we had been through. The journey had been long, filled with moments of despair, but also of triumph. There had been pain, of course, but there had also been growth. There had been times when I wasn't sure we would make it, times when I wasn't sure I would make it. But now, sitting here with Lucas beside me, I realized how far we had come. When I first met Lucas, I never imagined the path we would take. I never imagined that love could be so deeply tested. His blindness had changed our lives in ways we couldn't have anticipated. But it had also strengthened the bond between us. We had built a life together, one rooted in sacrifice, compassion, and unwavering support. I had learned to be his eyes, to be his guide through the world, and in return, he had given me a love so deep, so unconditional, that it made every challenge worth it. But then came the accident that had stolen his sight, and with it everything we had known. I had become the caretaker, the one who carried the weight of our lives while he fought to come to terms with his new reality. There were days when I didn't know how much longer I could carry the burden. There were moments when I resented the role I had taken on, the loss of myself in the process. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't walk away from him. And as much as I struggled, I knew deep down that I had chosen to be there, to be the person he needed. But the return of his sight changed everything. It didn't just restore his ability to see. It restored something within him that had been missing for so long. And in that process, it restored something in me too. We both had to learn to navigate this new chapter, one where we were no longer defined by his blindness, but by who we were as individuals and as partners. The road was rocky at times, filled with uncertainties and fears, but we walked it together. And in doing so, we grew stronger. I had always believed that love was about sacrifice, about giving of yourself for the person you loved. But through all of this, I realized something important. Love is not just about giving. It's also about evolving. Love isn't defined by what you can see, but by what you can feel, by the depth of connection that exists between two people, even when the world around them changes. Our love was never built on sight. It was built on trust, on shared experiences, on the understanding that we would always be there for each other, no matter the challenges we faced. Lucas's sight had been restored, but what had truly changed was the way we saw each other. We no longer relied on the roles we had taken on during the years of blindness. We didn't need those labels anymore. We were no longer defined by what we lacked but by what we had gained, the strength to face the future together. And now, as I looked at him sitting beside me, his hand resting gently in mine, I could feel the depth of everything we had shared. We had come full circle. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, more united than before. The future was no longer something I feared. It was something I looked forward to with hope. We had both changed, yes, but in many ways that was the point. The challenges we had faced had pushed us to grow, to learn more about ourselves and each other. And now, as we moved forward, we would do so as equals, as partners, no longer bound by what we had lost, but by what we had gained. Lucas and I had built a life together, and now we were beginning to rebuild it again, stronger than before. There would be more challenges ahead, of course, but we would face them together. Our bond was not defined by what had happened to us, but by what we had chosen to make of it. The future, with all its uncertainty, was ours to shape. We didn't need sight to see the love we shared. And we didn't need vision to know that together we could face whatever came next. We had come through the darkness, and now, hand in hand, we would walk into the light. And as we moved forward into this new chapter, I knew that the love we had built, through trials and triumphs, through losses and joys, would continue to grow, continue to evolve, and continue to define us, no matter what the future held.